The moment I stepped into that room, I knew something was off. Lights dimmed like it was a goddamn seance, chairs still warm, and that scent of corporate cologne that always comes before a public execution. I was supposed to be there to lead the defense pitch, the one I spent 9 months building. Every line of code, every export restricted diagram, every prototype validation thread, mine. My fingers, my sweat. My name was supposed to be on that screen. But there he was, Bryce. VP of Ops with a jawline sharp enough to slice deli meat and a soul that could curdle paint. Slicked back hair, Rolex fake enough to scream midlife crisis, and the smirk of a man who's never had an original idea in his entire overpriced career. He didn't even bother with eye contact when he said it. Just leaned back in the conference chair like he was auditioning for a tech noir villain monologue and muttered, "We briefed the Pentagon last night. Used our deck." He said it like we were some team, like we'd collaborated, like I hadn't flagged every damn slide for clearance validation and version control. Then he tossed a printed copy across the table, still warm from the copier, like a fresh turd on the linoleum, and it landed in front of me. V27 final. My real final was V31, and the only place that file existed was inside our secured SharePoint instance, last touched by me 3 nights ago after 3 hours of sleep and a mug of gas station coffee I wouldn't wish on an enemy. Page 2, gone. That was the disclaimer slide. The one with the export control verbiage and classified footnote that required signature review from both compliance and our internal FSO before any external presentation. Not optional, not decorative, legally mandated, and he'd stripped it like it was a formatting issue. Now pause a second, because if you're hearing this and shaking your head, thinking, no way he was that dumb, I need you to understand. These guys always are. They think because they've got a title and a LinkedIn banner photo with an American flag filter, they're untouchable. They think people like me, systems integrators, the ones who do the actual building, are just the scaffolding beneath their spotlights. And if you've made it this far, do me one favor. Hit that subscribe button and like the damn video, because 97% of you listening never do, and the team works their asses off, bringing stories like this to life. Seriously, it helps more than you know. All right, back to the circus. I didn't say a word when I saw the deck, just stared at the cover page like it was a stranger using my passport. There was a phrase I'd embedded, a test line, meaningless to anyone but me, missing. Instead, right there on slide 6 was one of my canaries. Blue dandelion variants. Sounds pretty, right? Totally innocuous. But that phrase only appeared in my internal redline drafts. It was never supposed to make it into a live deck. Its only purpose was to catch theft, like an invisible watermark for intellectual integrity, and now it was sitting in front of me. Printed, public, and if they really presented it to the Pentagon, officially traceable. I looked at Bryce, still smiling, tapping his pen like he'd just landed a moonshot. I didn't blink, didn't breathe, didn't scream. I just reached down, picked up the deck, and slid it into my leather folio. That smile of his twitched, just a fraction. He thought I was going to cause a scene. He thought I'd snatch it off the table and start yelling about IP rights or chain of custody. But I've learned. You don't yell in rooms like this. You document, you verify, you let the clock tick and the emails collect and the SharePoint logs build their quiet little army. So I nodded once, slow and mechanical, like I was confirming a coffee order, and said, "Appreciate the update." Then I left the room. Not to cry, not to rage, but to quietly, methodically burn the entire operation to the goddamn ground with compliance, chain of custody hashes, and federal teeth. Because if Bryce thought stealing my oxygen was smart, he was about to learn how sharp paper can be when you bleed it right. Back in my office, I didn't even take off my coat. Just sat down, pulled up my phone, and started hunting timestamps like a woman possessed. First thing I checked? Access logs. There it was. 2:11 a.m., login from Bryce's assistant's badge. Our SharePoint instance flagged it, quiet as a whisper, tucked inside the activity pane. File accessed, downloaded, renamed. No note, no approval chain, no compliance tag. Just a ghost trail of someone too arrogant to realize the system watches everything. That file wasn't his to open, wasn't cleared, and sure as hell wasn't greenlit for briefings, especially not one involving the feds. Next, I checked the calendar. My invite to the pitch had vanished, not declined, not rescheduled, just quietly removed from the chain like I never existed. That's not a glitch, that's a move. A premeditated little snip to keep me out of the room, keep my name off the meeting log, keep me out of the loop while they paraded my work like some plastic diorama they half understood. And what Bryce didn't understand, what he never understood, was that this wasn't about pride anymore. Not for me. Not when the slide they used, the one with my blue dandelion variants tag, meant they'd trotted restricted phrasing into public hands. That line was never decorative. It was a forensic trail, a phrase tied to draft builds not cleared for release. You say it in a public setting, especially in defense context, and any half-trained compliance officer worth her badge is going to raise a flag. And if that phrase landed anywhere near a civilian investor deck or unclassified channel, boom. Export Control Act comes knocking. ITAR, EAR, CUI, you name it. They turned a technical oversight into a federal interest. And I know what some people think. Oh, come on, it's just a phrase. No, it's not. It's the equivalent of licking a classified envelope and tossing it into a neighborhood book club. That deck wasn't just a PowerPoint. It was a minefield dressed up in bullet points. And the only reason I wasn't blowing a hole through every department right now was because I gave a damn about that program, about what it could actually do, about the people who'd be relying on the system we pitched to stay breathing when things go loud in the field. So I sat there, breathing through my nose, jaw locked. Rage is a tool if you sharpen it right. I wasn't about to march into Bryce's office and scream like some rabid project lead with a bruised ego. I didn't need vengeance. I needed documentation. I needed quiet. Surgical escalation, not for me, but for the system we'd built, for the prototype that still lived in my lab instance under my name and my license key, for the program that didn't deserve to die because some greasy VP wanted to play cowboy in front of a federal brass plate. I opened my compliance folder, email drafts, version logs, redline notes, everything I'd ever written that contained the words, "do not present without sign-off." I wasn't looking for ammo. I already had that. I was looking for trajectory. One question formed in my head like a steel rod cooling in water. Did they say my name during the brief? Because if they did, I was either part of it or liable for it. And if they didn't? Then they committed false attribution and unauthorized presentation using export-bound content from a controlled instance tied to a prototype still under an individual use lab license, not even fully transitioned to the company registry yet, which means, technically speaking, they built a tower on a slab they didn't own, and now that tower was tilting. I pulled the V31 file off the server, made a clone to my encrypted drive, checked the hash. It matched the copy in my notebook, a handwritten checksum I jotted at 1:47 a.m. the night I finalized the build. I never trusted their version control. They thought the cloud would save them. But clouds leak. I keep ledgers. My hand hovered over the phone. Not to call legal, not yet. I needed the right vector, someone who'd ask the right questions without triggering panic. So I opened a new message window and typed just one line to our facility security officer. Hey, can you confirm who was cleared to present Deck V27 at last night's brief? No accusation, no alarm bells, just bait. Because once that thread started pulling, I wasn't the one who'd unravel. They were. I took the call in the east stairwell 2 flights down from my office, and where the walls were thick enough to muffle both the HVAC and the sound of senior management gaslighting themselves into an SEC violation. Cold concrete, the faint buzz of a fluorescent emergency light, and me, kneeling on a step like I was in some back alley confessional, phone to my ear, tone flat as asphalt. Security office, this is Taylor. Hey, Taylor, just a quick one, I said, already knowing I'd be repeating this line in a deposition. Can you confirm the presenter clearances for last night's defense brief? File looks like V27. I could hear the pause in his breath. Not long, just a flicker. Copy. Who's asking? I gave my name. Full. Clear. The one tied to the prototype registry and every internal compliance report for the last fiscal year. The one that appears on the patent provisional Bryce likes to pretend he helped with. Taylor didn't ask why I needed it, just said, "Give me 10, and hung up. That was the first clean incision. Not a complaint, not a red flag, just a question. When you work in defense, you learn early. The loudest person in the room is usually the one who gets scrubbed from the minutes. Paper trails don't scream, They whisper, and the people who matter know how to read whispers. Next, I opened Outlook, drafted a short note to our contracting officer at the agency, not legal, not Bryce, the actual federal CO on the file. I kept it short, precise, like a scalpel. Subject, version integrity, V31. Only. Text, noting for clarity, only V31 includes correct compliance boundaries, export control footers, and approved language per internal policy. Any alternate version, e.g. V27, omits disclaimer and should not be used in program review settings. Please advise if clarification is needed. No tone, no blame, just a bullet-pointed truth too sharp to ignore. I read it 3 times. Attached, nothing, because that's what raises alarms. Attachments. You want attention, not escalation. Then I hit send and waited. 3 minutes later, read receipt. 5 minutes after that, a delivery confirmation from the DoD Secure Relay. 10 minutes, nothing. That was the tell. If it had been nothing, I'd worry. But this was federal nothing. The kind where someone reads something and walks it straight down the hallway before replying. I didn't need a reply. I needed momentum. Back upstairs, I opened the compliance folder on my drive and clicked through subtabs like muscle memory. I'd tracked every version update for 9 months, every compliance review tag, every sign-off comment, every time a disclaimer was moved 1 pixel left. The V27 they'd use wasn't just old, it was pre-audit, as in not legally shielded. Bryce had taken a draft and walked it into federal space like a clown with a briefcase full of fireworks. The prototype key embedded on slide 14, A9 access ID, was another breadcrumb. That string only authenticated to my lab instance. It wasn't just a product ID, it was a proof of life. If they tried to demonstrate functionality and use the wrong key, the system would soft lock, and that failure would timestamp itself. And that timestamp would point directly to the fact that someone presented capabilities they couldn't prove. I scrolled through my notes and stopped at a phrase I'd written 6 weeks earlier during a migraine-plagued compliance review. If they try to skip me, make sure they trip. At the time, it had felt petty. Now it felt like prophecy. I didn't run to legal. I didn't storm the boardroom. I didn't even mention Bryce by name. That's not how you win, not in this arena. The people who survive are the ones who sharpen their logic like piano wire and leave it stretched across the hallway, just high enough to catch a neck, but low enough that it looks like a stumble. This wasn't about revenge. This was about containment. Damage control. Because if the CO so much as blinked at that phrase, blue dandelion variants, or saw that disclaimer missing in a public-facing deck, the next call wouldn't be to Bryce, it'd be to internal affairs. And IA doesn't ask permission. They arrive with clipboards and questions and a look in their eyes like they already know the answers. So I leaned back, folded my hands, and stared out the window of my office as the clouds rolled in. Not worried, not rattled, just focused. Because Bryce might have hijacked the brief. But I owned the engine, the brakes, and the black box. And if they really tried to fly that thing without me, I was about to make damn sure the crash was properly recorded. There's a certain clarity that settles in once the adrenaline burns off. Not relief, something colder, clinical. You stop reacting and start assembling, not like a warrior gearing up for battle, but like a surgeon laying out tools before the incision. No wasted motion, no flinch, just precision, because the truth's about to go under the knife and someone has to make damn sure it walks out breathing. I started with the SharePoint archive. Corporate likes to pretend it's a junk drawer with a search bar, but for someone like me, it's a crime scene with timestamps. I pulled the version history on the deck. All of it. Not just V27 through V31. I went back to V14, the first time Bryce's assistant asked if we could just remove the legal stuff for internal review. That note was still there, like a fossilized footprint of the moment they decided compliance was optional. Each version download logged with a user ID, a time, a delta summary. The one from 2:11 a.m. showed Bryce's assistant saving a local copy after disabling version control. That's not just shady, it's deliberate and stupid, because disabling tracking on a secure system doesn't erase the log. It just adds a bigger red flag next to your name when someone looks. I exported the full audit trail, printed it on thick stock company letterhead, and highlighted the delta notes in red. Not to shout, just to make it easy to follow when some legal intern squints at it 3 hours from now and starts wondering who still uses highlighters. People who know what a real trail looks like, that's who. Then I headed down to records, pulled badge logs from the secure floor. You don't get to the restricted lab without swipe access. Every trip in and out, every override, every door held open by a shoe. It's all there. And guess what? Bryce hadn't been down there in weeks. Not once, not even for a walkthrough. But his deck? Slide 14. Prototype key, A9 confirmed active. That key only exists in my instance. It's not mirrored, not backed up. It lives on a closed system tied to a biometric login that's legally under my name. And if they tried to demo it, God help them, they'd be met with a soft lock screen that says in bold blue text, "Instance owner required." Meaning, they either faked the demo, guessed functionality, or worse, presented classified readiness claims they couldn't back up. None of which ends well, especially when your clearance level is lower than the software you're pitching. Last piece, I pulled my notebook from the bottom drawer, leather-bound, corners worn, held together by a rubber band and spiked. Inside, taped across page 117, was the checksum for V31, a 64-character hash I wrote in pen the night I signed off. I wrote every real final by hand, not to be dramatic, to be deliberate. My initials next to the hash, a note that read, V31, cleared, locked, delivered internally only. The page before that showed the checksum for V30, a different hash, different structure, the kind you can match against file metadata if you know what you're looking for, which I did, which the FSO would, which any federal tech forensics team could verify inside 60 seconds if this ever reached inquiry status. I flipped back to the front page, ran a finger down the table of contents I'd created, yes, I kept one, and added a new line. V27 unauthorized presentation trigger, 2:11 a.m. access confirmed. There's something sacred about writing that way. Pen to page, no backspace, no edit trail, just truth, preserved in ink. I slipped the notebook into my bag, locked the SharePoint audit files in a red folder marked confidential. Then I sat at my desk and waited. Not because I didn't have anything else to do, but because I'd already done everything that mattered. Let Bryce run his mouth in some corner office, trying to charm legal or bluff his way past an inquiry. Let him call it a misunderstanding or blame overzealous staff. It wouldn't matter. The hash wouldn't lie. The badge logs wouldn't lie. The license key wouldn't boot. And when someone finally asked the only question that mattered, can anyone validate this prototype live? There'd be only one face in the room they'd turn to. Mine. It started with a subject line, no greeting, no fluff. Just a short reply from the contracting officer, time-stamped 9:12 a.m. RE, version integrity, V31 only. The body was colder than a coroner's toe tag. Please confirm who presented the briefing, what classification level was cleared for discussion, and whether the standard disclaimer P2 was included during delivery. No exclamation points. No hedging, just 3 blades laid on the table, waiting to draw blood. I didn't smile, but something settled in my chest. Not relief, just gravity shifting. The burden of proof wasn't mine anymore. The right eyes were looking now, and they weren't going to be gaslit by a PowerPoint cowboy in a fitted blazer and someone else's credentials. I forwarded the CO's message to our facility security officer with a short line. Looping you in. 2 minutes later, Taylor replied, not to me, but directly to the CO. Included in the chain was an email I'd sent 5 weeks earlier. Subject, deck access, not cleared for external use. The body read like the prophecy. Please ensure no version below V31 is presented outside of internal review. Prototype A9 requires license authentication. P2 disclaimer mandatory per compliance protocol. No exceptions. Do not present without explicit written sign-off. Time-stamped. Signed. Archived. Now that email sat like a loaded gun in a federal inbox pointed squarely at Bryce's smirking head. I walked to the break room, made a cup of coffee I didn't want, and stared at the drip like it might boil over from pure tension. Nobody said anything when I passed them in the hallway. That's the thing about federal interest. People feel it before they hear it, like ozone before lightning. Everyone senses the air has shifted, but nobody knows who's about to get burned. Back at my desk, I opened the investor relations portal. It was a long shot, but my gut had been whispering for hours. Bryce didn't brief the Pentagon just for glory. He briefed them because he wanted to leverage it, and in his pea-brained marketing strategy, that meant parading the defense-adjacent deck in front of investors. I typed in my old credentials, still active, of course, and pulled the weekly investor drop folder. There it was. Uploaded at 7:03 a.m. that morning. Next-gen prototype pitch deck. Final. Not password protected. Not redacted. Just sitting there like bait for regulatory bloodhounds. I opened it. Page 6. Midway through a slide titled Signal Integrity and Redundancy. There it sat, my canary. Blue dandelion variance projected, 0.002% under MIL spec com stack. He hadn't even edited the sentence, just copy-pasted it like a toddler doing homework the night before. And now that phrase, unique to pre-release drafts, was sitting in a public investor folder under a file marked Final. That wasn't just a mistake. That was a controlled terminology leak into a civilian domain. And if there's one thing you don't do when handling export-controlled materials, it's give civilian investors access to military-aligned performance claims, especially ones that trace back to an unvalidated prototype sitting in a lab they can't name and a license they don't own. I took a screenshot, printed the slide, circled the phrase in pen, date stamped it, signed the corner like a damn forensic analyst. No drama, no speech, just documentation. By the time I closed the tab, my inbox dinged again. This one from our Director of Federal Programs, CC'd to Legal and FSO. Please confirm that all previous briefings were conducted with validated classification controls and cleared personnel. Audit file requested by EOD. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled. Just once. Deep. Long. Controlled. Because now it was out of my hands. The FSO would pull the badge logs, legal would compare version numbers, the CO would notify their oversight contact, and Bryce, he'd feel the shift. Not all at once, but it would come. First a missed call, then a meeting reschedule, then a strange silence during a leadership huddle where no one laughs at his jokes. The silence that falls when people are trying to figure out if the person next to them is radioactive. The truth had momentum now. It was rolling downhill and Bryce was chained to the tracks, and all I had to do was keep the records warm. They showed up just after lunch, no sirens, no drama, just a pair of clean suits and clipped IDs moving through reception like they'd been there before, because they had. Different programs, different names, same eyes, the kind that don't blink unless they mean to. One was DoD audit compliance, the other had no business card and didn't introduce himself. He just smiled like someone who already knew what drawer you keep your secrets in. I was in the back wing when they arrived, going over thermal variance reports that no one else seemed to realize would be useless if the prototype got pulled for non-compliance. Taylor pinged me with a one-line message. Conference RMC, bring the notebook. I didn't ask which one. I already had it in my bag. By the time I walked in, the air was thick. Bryce was there, collar just barely crisp, voice doing that tight-lipped chuckle thing he did when his confidence started to thin. We kept it high level, he was saying, waving toward the TV screen like that explained why half the deck's headers looked like they were cribbed from a Tom Clancy novel. One agent, taller, calmer, clicked his pen once and asked, "Can you confirm who presented the material, what classification level it was authorized under, and whether the standard export control disclaimer appeared on page 2? Bryce blinked like a man trying to remember if the NDA he signed included jail time. I took a seat. Quiet. Didn't speak until they looked at me. That moment came fast. "Ms. Lane," the quiet one said, "you authored the V31 submission, correct?" "Yes." He held up a stapled printout. "We've reviewed the V27 presented during the brief. The disclaimer's missing. The blue dandelion phrase appears. Your name does not. This file was also uploaded, verbatim, to a civilian investor portal 7 hours ago. Can you speak to that?" I opened the notebook. Flip to page 117. This is the checksum hash for the real final. V31. Page 2 includes the compliance disclaimer. Slide 14 references the A9 prototype key, which is lab-bound to my personal license. It soft locks without my biometric. I slid the notebook across the table. The agent didn't even flinch, just nodded and took it like a lab sample. "I have a question," said the taller one. "Can you demonstrate the license lockout?" I pulled out my phone, opened the control app, and mirrored the lab instance to the room's main screen. The terminal flashed alive. Authentication handshake initiated. Then I tapped the soft lock override and let the A9 instance hum through its boot cycle. Took 7 seconds, longest 7 seconds of Bryce's career. Then I held up my hand and let the system ping off my biometric. Full access unlocked. The prototype visuals ran clean, under my name. Logged, time-stamped, notarized internally by the system itself. "That's the real deck," I said quietly, tapping the screen. Bryce shifted in his chair. His tie looked tighter. His mouth opened, but the agent raised one finger, slow and deliberate. "There's one more item," the quiet one said, turning to the table. "We have an email from Ms. Lane, dated 5 weeks prior, instructing the team not to present any version below V31 pending compliance sign-off." Legal slid it across the table. My red-lined subject line practically glowed under the fluorescent lights. "Do not present without explicit sign-off." Bryce tried to talk then. Something about team assumptions, miscommunications, the old "we were moving fast" routine like it was a white flag painted corporate gray. But the agent just tilted his head and said, "You moved past a federal control gate. We're not here to negotiate intentions." That's when the board started watching him instead of me. The eyes that had followed me in, skeptical, now tracked every twitch of his jaw, every sputtered half-sentence that ended in nothing. One director asked flatly, "Did you authorize the upload to the investor folder?" Bryce didn't answer. Not fast enough. Defense counsel, seated at the end of the table, folded his laptop and said, "We'd like a short recess." The agents agreed. Everyone stood up but me. I wasn't there to posture. I wasn't there to gloat. I was there to protect a program I'd spent almost a year building, line by line, test by test, burn by calculated burn. Because this wasn't about Bryce anymore. This was about the 57 contractors whose paychecks would bounce if this pitch got revoked. About the 6 months of field testing that would go dark if the prototype got shelved. About the woman from procurement who emailed me last week saying her brother's unit was already hoping to get the system by Q3. So when the board turned back and asked, cautiously, "Is there a path to fix this?" I didn't lecture. I just opened a new folder and said, "If you want to reset, here's what it takes. My terms, my license, my oversight." Because we could still salvage the mission, but only if they let me light the fuse this time and walk out before it burned the wrong side again. The board pulled me into one of the smaller strategy rooms, the kind with 2 chairs too many and 1 clock no one ever remembered to wind. One of the directors, Karen Chang, the only one I'd trust with a flashlight in a blackout, closed the door gently behind her and said, "Can you stabilize this?" No apologies, no preamble, just the quiet, desperate calculus of people who finally realize the fire has reached their side of the building. I didn't make them wait. I pulled out a 1-pager I'd drafted an hour earlier when I felt the temperature start to shift. Title, Remediation Path, Deck Integrity and Program Salvage. The bullet points were clean, actionable, no corporate fluff. Reinstate V31 as the only valid version. File a corrective memo with the contracting officer clarifying unauthorized presentation and restating export boundaries. Rebrief the Pentagon team with verified clearances and my presence logged as technical lead. Quarantine all investor materials, immediate takedown, audit trail preserved. Document internal control failures with a recommended training cycle signed off by FSO and legal. I slid it across the table. Didn't sugarcoat it. "If we do this fast," I said, "we contain it. But the Prime needs to see this come from someone with both technical and compliance credibility, and they need to know the person who actually owns the prototype is now running the room." Karen leaned in, eyebrows pinched. "Owns?" I nodded, calm, steady. My employment addendum includes a license clause. If the prototype is presented externally without my documented sign-off, the IP reverts temporarily to my LLC for protection. That trigger was tripped the moment V27 went live without compliance approval. 2 other directors blinked. A third straightened in his chair like someone trying to pretend he knew that already. "It's valid?" Karen asked, voice quiet now. "Reviewed and signed by your general counsel," I said. 2 years ago. They didn't think it would matter because the clause only activates under breach. Well, this is breach. No one argued. Not now. I could feel the room shifting, not in fear, but in weight. Their power was bending, not breaking, folding toward necessity. Because for the first time since Bryce hijacked that deck, they understood what was really on the table. It wasn't just a presentation. It was a live weapon system of record. It was federal, traceable, and now dangerously exposed. One of the quieter board members, a logistics exec I'd never seen without a Bluetooth headset, rubbed his temples and said, "So what do you want?" I looked him in the eye. "You give me the compliance lead role for the remainder of the program. I coordinate the rebrief. My LLC licenses the prototype back under full audit control. I write the corrective memo. You fund independent training and oversight for internal staff going forward." "And Bryce?" "That's your call," I said. "But if he's still involved, I won't be, and neither will the program." Silence. Thick, but not heavy. Calculating. Karen finally nodded. "Draft the license reissue. You'll get it signed within the hour." I stood up, folding the remediation page back into my folder. "One more thing," I said, pausing at the door. "This isn't a win. It's a salvage. I spent 9 months getting this program ready to keep people alive, and you nearly tanked it because someone wanted to look good in front of investors. I'm not cleaning this up for you. I'm doing it for the mission. Don't make me choose between them again." No one spoke. I walked out of the room with my phone already buzzing. 3 missed calls from legal, 1 from the prime contractor, and a new calendar invite titled simply, "License Transfer, Immediate Execution." I accepted. Then I opened a blank memo titled Corrective Action Summary, A9 Prototype Incident, and wrote the first line without hesitation. Per Clause 7 of the Employment License Agreement, all unauthorized uses of the prototype have been noted. Oversight is restored. Integrity is non-negotiable. The remediation agreement took 3 hours and 15 drafts. Legal wanted to soften language. The board wanted to minimize optics. I didn't care how it sounded. I cared that it held. So I sat across from 2 junior counsel and a shell-shocked HR rep and repeated the same sentence until it landed word for word. Non-compliant presentations shall trigger automatic review, licensing authority shall remain with the originator, and prototype access shall require biometric verification tied to the original lab environment unless otherwise authorized in writing. They blinked like they were trying to swallow gravel, but they typed it, exactly as I said it. Bryce, for his part, was nowhere to be seen. By the time the paperwork circled back with the board's approval, he'd been officially placed on administrative leave pending internal and external investigation. No fanfare. No speech, just a soft HR memo that arrived with the smell of fresh toner and the kind of finality that doesn't need bold font. The program was mine now, not ceremonially, contractually. The remediation agreement named me special compliance lead for all rebrief activities with full autonomy to coordinate with federal auditors, the prime contractor, and program stakeholders. It also locked in an oversight budget, outside counsel for all future export and classification reviews, plus mandatory training for every exec above director level, including the board. That part was mine. I insisted. Because if you're going to clean house, you don't stop with the broken windows. You fix the goddamn foundation. The prototype? Licensed back through my LLC under limited terms. The company could act as a subcontractor, nothing more. The lab environment remained tied to my biometric. I retained final release rights, final edit rights, and sole authorization to assign new instance keys. Which meant they could pitch, but only if I turned the lights on. The consent memo was the last piece. It was short, quietly damning. Slide deck V31 shall be the only recognized version authorized for future briefings. All presentations must include P2 disclaimer language as permanent standard. Hash checksum. 8F2D4B, verified as issued by original author. Prototype A9 instance lock confirmed via audit timestamp. No unauthorized presentations permitted retroactively or forward. I initialed it in ink. They all did, one by one, like kids signing a field trip waiver they hadn't read. The agents were copied on the final send-off. I didn't need their approval. just their silence. By the time the last signature dried, the hierarchy had shifted. Not officially, not on the org chart, but in the eyes. People stopped looking past me in the hallway. Directors nodded instead of blinking. The intern who used to email me for slide edits now triple-checked version numbers before touching anything I'd built. Compliance was no longer a department. It was a name. Mine. Still, I didn't celebrate. I didn't post about it. Didn't call friends or pour a drink or gloat in some group chat with the other engineers who'd seen this place rot from the inside. This wasn't a win. It was the salvage of something that almost mattered too late. When I got home, I pulled the red folder from my bag and laid it on the kitchen table. Inside, next to the signed remediation packet, was the original page from my notebook. Page 117, the checksum hash of V31, still crisp, still clean. I slid it into a plastic sleeve and clipped it behind the consent memo. Not because I needed proof, because I wanted the next person who tried to cut corners to feel the weight of ink done right. The calendar invite for the rebrief pinged on my phone. Next Gen Defense Rebrief, final and complete, $10 a.m. The subject line didn't need my name. Everyone knew who was running the table now. They gave me the same room, Conference C, same carpet, same chairs, same humming projector that always threw a slight green tint on skin. But this time, the lights were on. Fully. No shadow games, no low-light theatrics. The VP sat 2 seats from the edge, Bryce somehow still thinking he had a foothold left to defend, his posture rigid like he could bluff gravity if he just sat still enough. Agents across from him, silent, pens resting on pads. The board lined the far wall like school kids waiting for roll call, each one holding a printed remediation copy they'd initialed that morning. I stepped to the podium, calm as cold steel, connected my device, mirrored my screen. 2 decks queued side by side. On the left, Next Gen Prototype Pitch, V27 Final. On the right, Authorized Submission, V31. I started with slide 2. Here's the disclaimer, I said, gesturing toward the right. Standard export control language, required under Section 8C of our contract. I clicked to the left. Here's V27. Note the omission. A few heads nodded. Slide 6. Here's the canary phrase, blue dandelion variants. This was only ever used in internal drafts. It never appeared in production-level materials. It functions as a digital watermark. I advanced both decks simultaneously, pointed to the footer metadata. V31 includes cryptographic timestamping embedded in the header layer, verified by this checksum, 8F2D4B3E, matches the handwritten hash recorded 6 weeks ago in my project notebook. All access, post-sign-off logged through our lab control instance. Then I opened the terminal window. I'll now demo the A9 instance, which authenticates only to my license. The system loaded. Seamless. My biometric pinged. Access granted. Prototype A9 came to life on the main screen, HUD glowing soft amber with confirmation indicators. Then I clicked over to the copy Bryce's team had presented. Here's the environment they used. I hit Run. Access denied. Instance stalled. Message. License authentication failed. User not recognized. A quiet breath moved through the room. No one said a word. Bryce broke first. Okay, look, the point of the brief wasn't to get technical, he started. Agent number 1 raised a hand. Mr. Bryce, please stop speaking. Bryce tried again. I didn't know the phrase wasn't cleared. Security entered through the back, calm, plain-clothed, badged. One stepped forward with a quiet nod to legal. Bryce stood, protesting under his breath. Something about misunderstanding protocol, temporary oversight, the usual slurry of weak men caught mid-lie. They escorted him out before he could finish a sentence. When the door clicked shut behind them, I turned back to the screen. Closed V27, expanded V31 to full screen. Let the deck breathe. This is the brief, I said. The only brief that matters. It's cleared, validated, and truthful, not because it's perfect, but because it doesn't pretend to be more than it is. Agent Naritu closed her notepad. We accept the corrective action plan. No further inquiry pending implementation. The prime contractor's rep stood next. We're prepared to countersign the license transfer through Lane Systems LLC effective immediately. Karen, from the board, tapped her pen against the retention bonus line on my new authority memo. We've also approved the new compliance structure with performance milestones. You've earned discretion. I didn't thank them. Didn't smile, just nodded. Once. Because this wasn't about recognition. It was about reclamation. The lights were still on as I packed my bag. The screen behind me still displayed V31, soft glow bathing the room like dawn after a fire. The projector fan whirred, steady and low, like something at rest. I walked out, past the glass doors of Conference C, past the lobby that used to feel too cold, too clean. My phone buzzed. Calendar invite. Proper brief, 10:08 a.m. tomorrow. No qualifiers, no extra names, just mine on the presenter line. I stepped outside. Sunlight hit my face like an exhale I didn't know I'd been holding for 9 months. Not joy, something quieter, a permission to let go. People ask me what happened that day. I'd just say this. The deck told the truth. It just needed the right lighting.